North Carolina, May 1945. Camp Shelby Transit Annex. Marta Vogel had not complained once in 3 weeks of transport. Not about the cold, not about the delays, not about the bread that came every other day in portions so small she had stopped thinking of them as meals. She had learned not to notice hunger the way you learn not to notice a sound that never stops. Not because it disappears, but because noticing it costs more than you have left to spend. She stepped off the truck and smelled food. Real food. Hot. Abundant. Coming from somewhere inside the low building ahead with the indifference of a place that cooked like this every single day. She did not move toward it. She stood in the May sun and breathed it in and told herself it was probably not for them. It was for them. And that, more than the journey, more than the surrender, more than anything that had happened in the 3 years before it, was the thing she was not prepared for. Camp Shelby Transit Annex had not been built for permanence. The buildings were low and functional, put together with the practical speed of a military that had stopped asking whether things were comfortable and started asking only whether they worked. The yard between the barracks and the mess hall was packed dirt, red-brown in the Carolina sun, and the women who stepped off the transport truck that Tuesday morning in May stood in it and looked at the place with the careful, assessing quiet of people who have learned not to react until they know what they are reacting to. There were 11 of them. Former auxiliaries, nurses, clerks, radio operators. Women who had served the German war machine in its administrative margins and now stood in the dirt of a country they had been told was their enemy, waiting to be told what came next. Marta Vogel stood near the back of the group and said nothing. She was 27, thin in the way that 3 years of shrinking rations make a person thin, not dramatically, not visibly sick, just reduced, like a photograph left too long in the light. Her uniform was clean because she had made it clean on the transport, washing it with the small bar of gritty soap that had to last the week, and hanging it to dry from the window bar overnight. She had her mother's habit of keeping things presentable regardless of what surrounded them. Her mother had called it dignity. By 1943, Marta had started thinking of it as the only thing left she could control. A young American corporal with a clipboard moved down the group, checking names against a list. His English came too fast for most of them. He seemed to know this. He slowed down, repeated things, pointed when words failed. He was not unkind. He was not particularly kind either. He was simply doing his job with the brisk efficiency of someone who had processed many groups of people and expected to process many more. Mess hall first, he said, and the interpreter beside him turned it into German. Then assignments. Follow me. They followed. The mess hall smell hit Marta before the door opened. Meat. Bread. Something sweet underneath. Fruit, perhaps, or syrup. Hot coffee strong enough to reach the yard. She had not smelled a kitchen like this since before the war, since her aunt's house in Bavaria in the summer of 1938, when the table was still full and nobody had started talking about sacrifice yet. She breathed it in once and then stopped breathing it in, because wanting things that were not yet confirmed as available was a habit she had spent years breaking. Inside, long tables ran the length of the hall. American soldiers sat at some of them, eating without ceremony, their trays loaded in a way that Marta registered without allowing herself to fully process. She kept her eyes forward. A server behind the counter, a wide, red-faced civilian man in a white apron, gestured at the tray rack. The interpreter nodded at the women. They each took a tray. The line moved forward. Marta watched the woman ahead of her receive a portion of stew, a thick slice of bread, a ladle of beans, a cup of fruit. The server gave it without measuring, without checking a ration card, without the particular expression of someone calculating how much was left and how many people still needed feeding. He simply filled the tray and moved to the next one. When Marta reached the counter, she held out her tray. The server filled it the same way: stew, bread, beans, fruit. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took the bread off the tray and handed it back. "Just the stew," she said in German. The interpreter started to translate, but a voice from the far end of the counter cut across the room before she finished. "Hold on." A man came around from the end of the serving line. Tall, somewhere in his mid-50s, with the build of someone who had done physical work his whole life and hadn't stopped. His apron was stained from the morning's cooking. He looked at Marta's tray, then at the bread in her hand, then at her face. "Roy Aldine," he said. "I run this kitchen." The interpreter translated. Marta looked at him steadily. "I don't need the bread. You don't want it, or you don't think you should take it?" She said nothing. Roy looked at her for a moment with the unhurried attention of a man who had learned to read hunger the way farmers read weather. Not from what people said, but from what their bodies were doing when they thought no one was watching. "Take the bread," he said. "There's more where that came from. There's always more." Marta held his gaze for a moment. Then she put the bread back on the tray. She carried it to the nearest table and sat down and looked at the food in front of her, More food in one meal than she had received in a full day's ration in Berlin in the winter of 1944, and picked up her fork and began to eat slowly, carefully, the way you eat when your body has forgotten that stopping is a choice and not a requirement. Roy watched her from the end of the counter for a moment. Then he went back to his kitchen. Work assignments came after breakfast, same folded slips, same block letters. Marta sent her to the mess hall kitchen. Report at 6. Ask for Roy. She arrived 2 minutes early. Roy was already at the long prep counter with a knife and a crate of vegetables, moving through them with the steady efficiency of someone for whom cooking was not a skill but a condition. Something he simply was, the way some people are carpenters or teachers without being able to explain when it started. He looked up when she came in. You speak any English? Some, she said. Not fast. Slow is fine. He pointed to the far end of the counter. Potatoes. Peel them, cube them, put them in the pot. I'll show you the size. He held up 2 fingers, indicating the rough dimension of each cube. She nodded and went to work. For the first hour they worked in parallel silence, Roy moving between the stove, the counter, and the large cold storage room at the back, Marta working through the potato crate with steady focus. The kitchen had 2 other workers, a young private named Curtis who washed dishes with the defeated resignation of someone who had clearly hoped for a different assignment, and a civilian woman named Dottie, who managed the bread station and hummed continuously, without seeming to notice she was doing it. It was an ordinary kitchen. That was the thing Marta kept returning to, the sheer ordinariness of it. The smells, the rhythm, the sound of a knife on a board. Ordinary in a way that German kitchens had stopped being somewhere around 1942 when the rations tightened, and cooking became an act of mathematics rather than nourishment. Roy appeared at her end of the counter. He looked at the cubed potatoes. Good, he said. Consistent. He picked one up, assessed it, put it back. You cook at home? My mother cooked, Marta said. I helped. Where's home? Berlin. He nodded, the same nod people gave when they were acknowledging a word that carried more than its dictionary meaning. Your family still there? My mother. Yes. She doing all right? Marta set down the knife for a moment. The question was so plainly asked, not probing, not political, just one person asking about another person's mother, that it arrived without warning in a place she hadn't been guarding. She writes when she can, Marta said. The last letter was 2 months ago. What did she say? That she was managing. Marta picked up the knife again. That is what she always says. Roy was quiet for a moment. My wife says the same thing when I'm away, he said. Means she isn't, but she doesn't want you to worry. Marta looked at him. Mothers are like that, he said, and moved back to the stove. Hey, if you're enjoying the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Also, I'd love to know which part of the US you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. At mid-morning, Roy set 2 cups of coffee on the counter and gestured at the stool near the wall. Break, he said. Marta sat. The coffee was hot and strong and real. Not the ersatz grain mixture that had passed for coffee in Germany since 1942, but actual coffee, dark and slightly bitter, the kind that reminded her of before. She held the cup in both hands and said nothing for a moment. Roy leaned against the counter across from her. How long were you in the auxiliary? He asked. 3 years. Nurse. Yes. Hard work. Yes. He drank his coffee. Outside the kitchen window, the Carolina morning was doing what Carolina mornings did in May, filling up with light and birdsong and the smell of something green that had nothing to do with war. You eat this morning? Roy asked. All of it. Most of it. Most isn't all. I wasn't used to that much, she said. It felt wrong to finish it. Roy set his cup down. Wrong how? She thought about how to say it in English that was honest without being more than she wanted to give. At home, she said slowly. You finish everything because there is not much. Here, there is so much that finishing feels. She stopped. Wasteful, Roy offered. No. She looked at the cup in her hands. Undeserved. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Dottie had stopped humming. Curtis was between loads. Roy looked at her with the steady, unhurried attention he had given her tray that first morning. Let me ask you something, he said. All right. Back home. Before the war, after the war started, all of it. Were you ever actually fed? Not rationed. Not managed. Federal. Marta looked up at him. The question landed in a place so unguarded that for a moment she had no response at all, not because she didn't understand it, but because she understood it completely and had never once heard it asked out loud. Not by her mother, not by anyone she had served with, not by any officer or official or person in authority in 3 years of war. The regime had called rationing sacrifice. It had called hunger strength. It had given the scarcity a name that made it sound like virtue, and she had worn that name so long she had stopped feeling the thing underneath it. Were you ever actually fed? She opened her mouth, closed it. Roy did not rush her. He simply waited, the way he had waited with the bread on her first morning, present, patient, requiring nothing. No, she said finally. Her voice was level. I don't think we were. Roy nodded once. Not with satisfaction, not with pity. Just acknowledgement. The plain recognition of a true thing that had been said out loud for the first time. Well, he said, picking up his cup. You are now? So finish your plate. He went back to the stove. Marta sat on the stool with her coffee going cool in her hands and looked at the middle distance and did not move for a long moment. Outside, a bird landed on the windowsill, looked in briefly with the incurious confidence of something that had never been told to make itself smaller, and flew away. The second week settled into something Marta had not expected. Routine. 6 o'clock in the kitchen. Potatoes, then whatever Roy needed, prep work, portioning, cleaning between batches, the steady physical logic of a working kitchen that asked nothing of her except attention and consistency. Roy corrected her twice in the first week, both times without sharpness. He showed her the right way to break down a chicken, the correct temperature for the bread oven, the particular way he wanted the serving line restocked, from the back, so the older portions came out first. Why does that matter? She asked on the third day. Because nothing goes to waste here, he said. Not if I can help it. She had expected a kitchen run on military efficiency, precise, cold, indifferent to the people it fed. Instead, Roy's kitchen operated on a principle she couldn't immediately name. It took her several days to find the word. Care. He cared about the food the way a craftsman cares about his work. Not sentimentally, not with speeches about it. Just in the 1,000 small decisions he made each day that added up to a kitchen where nobody left hungry and nothing was treated as expendable. On Wednesday of the second week, Dottie brought a tray of biscuits out of the oven and set one in front of Marta without being asked. Try it, she said. Tell me if it needs more salt. Marta tried it. It's good, she said. More salt. No. It's good as it is. Dottie nodded, satisfied, and went back to her station. The exchange lasted 20 seconds. It was the most natural 20 seconds Marta had experienced in 3 years. A woman asking another woman's opinion about a biscuit, with no agenda attached, in a warm kitchen on a Wednesday morning. She thought about it for the rest of the day. The letter arrived on Thursday. It came through the camp mail system. The Red Cross had established a limited correspondence route by then. Slow and unreliable, but present. The interpreter brought it to Marta after the lunch service. A thin envelope with her mother's handwriting on the front. The letters slightly uneven in the way her mother's handwriting had become uneven in the last years, as though the hand itself was tired. Marta waited until the kitchen was cleaned and Roy had dismissed her for the afternoon. She sat on the low wooden bench outside the mess hall and opened it. Her mother wrote the way she always wrote. Practically, without drama, moving through facts as though facts were easier to deliver than feelings. The building on their street had lost 2 more families to relocation. The ration allocation had been reduced again in March. Coal was difficult. Her mother had been sharing the apartment with a neighbor woman since February because 2 people in one space was warmer than 1 person in 2 spaces. She was managing. She was well. Don't worry about me, she wrote. You were always the one who worried too much. I have enough. Marta read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease and held it in her lap. Her mother had enough. That was the phrase. Not plenty, not more than enough, just enough, which in her mother's language meant something considerably less than that. She had been translating her mother's enough for 3 years. Enough meant the neighbor's soup stretched between 2 people. Enough meant the coal lasted if you wore your coat indoors. Enough meant alive, which was the minimum available definition of the word, and the one her mother had quietly adopted without ever saying so. Marta looked up at the mess hall building. Through the screen door, she could hear Roy moving around inside, preparing for the evening service. The sound of a pot set on the stove, water running. The low tuneless sound Roy made when he was working alone and didn't know anyone was listening. Not quite humming, not quite singing, just sound, the unconscious audio of a man comfortable enough in his own kitchen to make noise without purpose. She sat on the bench for a long time. At the evening service, she took her tray and went through the line and sat at the end table near the window. The food was hot, a beef stew richer than the lunch service, with carrots and onions and bread that had come out of the oven an hour ago. She looked at it. She picked up her fork, put it down, picked it up again, put it down. Roy came out of the kitchen with a cloth over his shoulder, checking the serving line. He saw her at the end table. He saw the untouched tray. He finished checking the line, said something to Curtis, and walked over. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He didn't ask about the food. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat, the way he stood at the counter when he was thinking, present and unhurried, occupying the space without demanding anything from it. After a moment, Marta took the letter from her pocket and set it on the table between them. He looked at it. From home. My mother, she said. She says she has enough. But she doesn't. No. Marta looked at the tray. She is sharing an apartment because two people are warmer. She stopped. She is surviving. That is the correct word. Roy said nothing. And I am here, Marta said, eating beef stew. Her voice did not break. It stayed level, but carrying something so heavy that the levelness itself was a kind of effort. More in one meal than she sees in a week, probably. And she is the one who tells me not to worry. The mess hall moved around them, soldiers eating, trays collected, the ordinary noise of a room full of people being fed without anxiety. Dottie refilled the breadbasket at the far end. Curtis moved between tables. Outside the window, the Carolina evening was warm and unhurried and full of birds. When did the rationing start? Roy asked. 42, she said. Seriously, 42. Before that it was already less, but 42 was when you felt it every day. 3 years. Yes. And the whole time they told you it was sacrifice, she said. They called it sacrifice. They said it meant we were strong, that we were giving for something larger. She looked at the letter. My mother stood in queues. She traded things she had kept since her wedding. She wore her coat indoors all winter. She paused, and they called it strength. Roy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that's not strength. That's just hunger with a flag on it. The words arrived so plainly, so without ceremony, that Marta looked up at him with the expression of someone who has just heard a thing they already knew but had never been given permission to know out loud. Eat your dinner, Roy said gently. Your mother would want you to. He stood, put the chair back, and returned to his kitchen. Marta looked at the tray. She picked up her fork. She ate all of it, slowly, without pleasure exactly, but with the particular deliberateness of someone performing an act of loyalty to a person who was not in the room. Each bite a small answer to the letter in her pocket. Each bite the thing she could do, from here, which was not enough and was also everything available. When she finished, she sat for a moment with the empty tray in front of her. Then she folded the letter, put it back in her pocket, and carried her tray to the window. The third week brought heat. Carolina in late May does not ease into warmth. It arrives with full conviction, pressing down on the red dirt yards and the low wooden buildings, and the people moving between them with the authority of a climate that has decided the matter and will not be argued with. By 8 in the morning the kitchen was already working against it, the stoves adding their own heat to the air until moving through the space felt like moving through something with weight. Roy responded to the heat the way he responded to everything, by adjusting without complaint. He opened both back doors, reorganized the prep schedule to get the oven work done before 7, and started keeping a large jar of cold water on the counter that anyone could drink from without asking. Marta noticed that last detail on Monday morning and said nothing about it. But she drank from it, and so did Curtis and Dottie, and Roy refilled it twice before lunch without mentioning it once. On Tuesday, a chaplain came into the mess hall during the mid-morning lull. He was young, younger than Marta expected chaplains to be, mid-30s perhaps, with the slightly distracted air of someone whose mind was always working on two things simultaneously. He came in looking for Roy, found him at the back counter, and they spoke briefly in the low, comfortable shorthand of men who knew each other well enough to skip the front of a conversation and start in the middle. Marta was at the prep counter close enough to hear fragments. The chaplain said something about a family on the base, a soldier's wife who had just received bad news, something about her brother overseas. He said it quietly, with the careful economy of someone trained to carry other people's weight without spilling it. Roy listened. Then he said, "Send her here at noon. I'll make sure there's something hot." The chaplain nodded. "She probably won't eat." "She doesn't have to eat," Roy said. "She just has to sit somewhere warm." The chaplain left. Roy went back to his prep work without further comment. Marta turned back to her potatoes. She had understood perhaps 2/3 of the exchange. But she had understood enough. She thought about it through the rest of the morning. The simplicity of it, the complete absence of calculation. A woman was having a hard day, and Roy's response was not paperwork, not procedure, not the careful management of the situation. It was, "Send her here, I'll make sure there's something hot. She doesn't have to eat. She just has to sit somewhere warm." That was all. That was the whole of it. She had spent 3 years in a system that treated human need as a logistical problem, something to be managed, rationed, processed through the correct channels. She had watched officers decide who received care, and in what quantity based on criteria that had nothing to do with the person in front of them. She had delivered that care herself, efficiently, correctly, according to the system. She had never once heard anyone say, "She doesn't have to eat. She just has to sit somewhere warm." The woman came at noon. She was perhaps 30, dark-haired, with the particular composure of someone who has been holding themselves together in public and is beginning to feel the cost of it. Roy sat her at the corner table, the same table where he had sat across from Marta 3 nights ago, and brought her a bowl of soup and a cup of coffee, and said something to her quietly that Marta couldn't hear. The woman didn't eat for a long time. She held the coffee cup and looked at the table. Roy went back to his kitchen. He did not check on her. He did not hover. He simply allowed her to be there, in the warm room, with the soup going slightly cold in the bowl, for as long as she needed. After 20 minutes, she ate the soup. She drank the coffee. She sat for a while longer. Then she came to the kitchen door and said something to Roy, and Roy said something back, and she left. Roy returned to the afternoon prep without comment. Marta was cleaning the prep counter when he came back. She kept her eyes on her work. She ate, she said, after a moment. She always does eventually, Roy said. People just need someone to wait them out sometimes. He picked up his knife and began the afternoon vegetables. Thursday came in hotter than the days before it. Marta worked through the morning service and the cleanup and the prep for the afternoon without stopping. She was tired in the deep, accumulated way of someone who had been tired for a long time. Not from the work, which was manageable, but from the effort of processing, every day, the continuous contrast between what she was living inside now and what she had come from. The letter from her mother was still in her pocket. She had not taken it out again. But she was aware of it the way you are aware of something that has settled into the fabric of the day without asking permission. At the end of the afternoon service, when the hall had emptied and Curtis had finished the dishes and Dottie had gone home, and the kitchen had arrived at its quiet end-of-day state, Marta sat on the bench outside the back door to cool down. She had not planned to cry. She was not, particularly, a person who cried. She had been trained out of it the same way she had been trained out of complaining about rations, and trained into calling hunger sacrifice, and trained into the particular emotional efficiency that the regime required of the people who served it. But the heat and the tiredness and the letter and the accumulated weight of 3 weeks of receiving more than she had been given in 3 years, all of it arrived at once in the quiet of the back step, and before she had decided anything about it she was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just tears, steady and quiet, the way water finds its level when you stop holding it back. She heard the screen door open behind her. Roy came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her on the bench without a word. He handed her one of the cups. She took it. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not offer a solution. He did not look at her with the particular careful expression of someone managing a situation. He simply sat beside her in the heat of the late Carolina afternoon and drank his coffee and allowed her the full space of what she was feeling without requiring it to be anything other than what it was. They sat like that for several minutes. The yard in front of them was quiet. A sparrow moving along the base of the opposite building, a truck somewhere on the far side of the camp, the slow creak of the mess hall sign shifting in a small breeze that had finally arrived from somewhere cooler. Marta stopped crying. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She drank her coffee. Then Roy said, without turning his head, "You know what I've noticed about you?" "What?" she said. "You work hard. You're careful. You don't take more than you think you've earned." He paused. "That's not a bad way to be. But whoever taught you that you had to earn the right to eat, they were wrong." Marta looked at the yard. "They told us it was for something," she said quietly. "The sacrifice. The rationing. They said it was building something." "What did it build?" Roy asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing," she said. "It built nothing. It just ran out." Roy nodded. He finished his coffee. He set the cup down on the step beside him and looked at the yard with the patient, unhurried expression of a man who had said the thing he meant to say and was content to let it sit. "My son came home from the Pacific last year," he said. "He lost 20 pounds over there. First thing his mother did was put him at the kitchen table and feed him for 3 days straight." He paused. She didn't ask him if he'd earned it. She didn't ask him if he deserved it. She just fed him because he was her boy and he was hungry, and that was the whole of the situation. Marta held her cup in both hands. "That's all this is," Roy said. "You're here. You're hungry, not just today, but from a long time back. And this is a kitchen." He stood up, picked up his cup. "That's the whole of the situation." He went back inside. Marta sat on the step for a while longer. The sparrow found something in the dirt near the opposite building and worked at it with focused energy. The small breeze came back, slightly cooler this time, moving through the yard with the indifferent kindness of weather that doesn't know anything about what has just happened but arrives at the right moment anyway. She finished her coffee. Then she went back inside and helped Roy set up for the evening service, and neither of them said anything more about it. And that was exactly right. The notice came on a Friday. Marta read it, folded it, put it in her pocket beside her mother's letter. The 2 pieces of paper sat together there for the rest of the day, the letter that had come from home, and the notice that said she was going back to it. She worked her last shift the following morning. 6 o'clock, same as always. The kitchen was the same, the heat already building by 7. Dottie at the bread station humming something without realizing it. Curtis at the sink with his permanent expression of mild defeat. Roy at the counter with his clipboard, moving through the morning inventory with the focused efficiency that had been the first thing she had noticed about him and was now simply the texture of the place. She worked through the prep without speaking much. There was not a great deal to say. The work said most of it. The careful cubing of the vegetables, the correct temperature, the serving line restocked from the back, so nothing went to waste. She had learned Roy's kitchen the way you learn a language when you live inside it. Not by studying it, but by moving through it, until it became the way things were done. At the end of the morning service, Roy poured 2 coffees and set one in front of her. Last day, he said. Yes. He drank his coffee. Outside the window, the Carolina morning was doing what it did, filling up with light, unhurried, asking nothing. You know what you're going back to, he said. It was not a question. The ordinary sky that had nothing to say about the fact that this was the last time any of them would stand in this particular yard. Marta stood with her bag at her feet and looked at the mess hall building one more time. The screen door was propped open the way Roy propped it on hot afternoons. Inside, she could hear the kitchen in its midday rhythm. The sound of prep work beginning for the evening service, steady and unhurried. The way it had been every day she had been here, and would be every day after she was gone. Roy appeared at the screen door. He looked at the group for a moment. Then he found Marta and held up one hand. Not a wave exactly, more the gesture of someone acknowledging the end of something that mattered without making it into more than it was. She raised her hand back. He went inside. The tailgate dropped. The women climbed in one by one. Marta settled against the metal wall and felt the engine turn over beneath her and the camp begin to move away. She put her hand in her pocket. Her mother's letter was there, and beside it, folded into a small square, a piece of paper Roy had pressed into her hand that morning when she was not expecting it. She had not opened it yet. She opened it now. His handwriting was large and unpracticed, the handwriting of a man more comfortable with a knife than a pen. You were always allowed to eat. You just didn't know it yet. Marta held the paper in her lap and looked at it for a long time as the truck moved through the Carolina afternoon. Past the low buildings, past the red dirt yards, past the ordinary American landscape that had no idea what it had given her simply by being what it was. She folded the paper carefully and put it back in her pocket. Outside, through the gap in the canvas, the road unrolled ahead of them, long and straight, and leading toward a country. Yes, she said. It will be hard for a while. Probably. The rebuilding, she stopped. Everything will need to be rebuilt. It will, Roy said. Takes time. But it gets done. He set his cup down. Germany's got people who know how to work. That counts for something. Marta looked at her coffee. I didn't know what I was working for, she said. Before. I told myself I did, but, she stopped again. I just followed the system. I didn't ask if the system was right. Most people don't, Roy said. Not while they're inside it. That's not an excuse. No, he said. It isn't. But it's a starting point. He looked at her directly. You're asking now? That's not nothing. She held the cup in both hands. What do I do with everything I've seen here? Roy thought about it for a moment in the way he thought about things, genuinely, without rushing toward an answer. You take it home, he said. Not as a story about Americans. Just as proof that it's possible. That a kitchen can feed people without counting them. That a person can sit somewhere warm without earning it first. He paused. You already know it's possible because you lived inside it. Nobody can take that away from you. Marta looked at him. And when you're back, he said, and somebody tells you that going without is strength, you'll know that's not true. Because you'll have had the real thing to compare it to. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my mother will not believe me. Maybe not at first, Roy said. But feed her something. Don't tell her about it. Just feed her. She'll understand. The truck came at 2. The women assembled in the yard with their bags. The Carolina afternoon pressed down on everything with its full May weight. The red dirt, the low building that would need to be rebuilt from the ground up, starting with the most basic things. Food. Warmth. The simple, radical idea that the person in front of you deserves what you have to give. She knew something now that she had not known when she stepped off the truck 3 weeks ago. Not as an argument, not as a political position, just as a lived, irreversible fact, the kind that gets into the body and stays there. It was possible to be fed without earning it. It was possible to sit somewhere warm without deserving it first. It was possible for a man to ask if you were hungry and mean nothing by it except that he had noticed, and you were, and he had food. The truck drove on, and in her pocket, pressed between her mother's careful handwriting and Roy's unpracticed scrawl, 2 pieces of paper carried between them the whole distance between what she had come from and what she now knew was possible. That was enough to bring home. That was, in fact, more than enough.